Welcome everybody to this video on for loops, and more specifically ranges with for loops. So before we get into this and we look at our for loops, what I first want to look at is what are ranges, okay? So when we generate a range in Python, this means that we are creating a set of numbers according to a specific set of rules that we decide to give it when we create it. There are three ways to create ranges in Python that we'll go over. The first one is using a range in which we specify a stopping point. When we do this, this means that our set of numbers will always start at 0 and will end at our stopping point, not including that number. So for instance, if I put in a range of 10, what will happen is it will create a range of 0 to 10, where 0 is inclusive in the range and 10 is exclusive. In other words, the range that we're given is right here. It's 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. You'll notice that 10 is excluded because the last number is always considered exclusive. The second way which we can create ranges is we can have a start and a stop point. If we decide to put in two parameters, we will get a start and a stop point here. So for instance, if I decide to print out a range here with 5 to 10, what will happen is this will create a range of 5 to 10, where 5 once again is inclusive, and 10 is exclusive. So my range would be 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Notice again, there is no 10. We always exclude our second index, which is stopping point. We include our starting point. Now, you'll notice that all of these increment by 1 every single time inside of their sets of numbers. This is because this is the default way in which range works. If you want to change that, you need to add a third number into our range. And so that's where we have a start, a stop, and a step. So in order to do this, I'm going to create a range. I'm going to print, and it's going to have 2, 10, and 2. This means my starting number is 2, my ending number or my stop number is 10, and my step will be by 2 now instead of by 1. So this creates a range from 2 to 10, where 2 is inclusive, and 10 is exclusive. So we're going to exclude the 10, but we're going to count by 2's instead of by 1's. So this means I start with 2, I'll add 2 and I'll get 4, which I'll add 2, I'll get 6, I'll add 2 and I'll get 8. Now remember, when 8 adds 2, it will get 10, and since 10 is exclusive, we will not add the 10 onto our number here. Okay, so now that we've talked about ranges, what we're going to talk about is how we're going to use them in conjunction with loops, or more specifically, the for loop. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to introduce our for loops, also known as counted loops. The reason they're called counted loop is because when we go to run them, we know how many times they're going to run. So for instance, if you look back at our ranges here, we know that this has 10 numbers in it. Therefore, if we were to loop this, it would run 10 times. This one has 5, so we loop 5 times. This one has 4, so we would loop 4 times. So let's give an example of this. I'm going to show us our first for loop here. I have 4 num in range, and then I have a 10. So how this is going to work is when our for loop decides to run, instead of like with our while loop where we had another variable outside that we dealt with, that variable is instead going to be replaced by num. So what's going to happen is num is going to take on the values of each of these numbers inside the range. The first time through the loop, num's value will be 0. The next time through the loop, num's value will be 1. Then it will be 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, then 7, then 8. And the last time through the loop, it will be 9, because when it gets to the 9, it knows it's our last time through, it comes back. If we were to try to go further on, since our range has no more numbers in it, our loop will end and it will skip the body of the code. Okay, so remember, as I talked about before, this is going to start as 0, our first number, and it's going to include the 0, and our second number is going to be inclusive. In other words, our 10 is exclusive, and it will not be used, and instead our last number will be 9. Each time through our loop, remember that this will increase by 1, since our increment step by default is 1 unless we specify it. Last but not least, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to print out the value of num just to show you what happens each time through the loop. So if I run this, you'll notice that I get 0, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. In other words, the numbers that were in our range. And they're all on different lines since I used a print statement which will add a new line character after each num. Okay? So let's try this again, but this time I'll use a different range. I'll use the one where we have a start and a stop. So I have 4, and I have 10, so this will start at 4, it will end at 10. Remember, it is exclusive, so it does not use 10, it will stop before it at 9 instead. Okay? Always remember this first number is inclusive, our second number is exclusive. So if I print this out, remember I'll have 0 to 9 for my first one, and then I have 4 through 9 for my second one, which runs 5 times, printing those 5 numbers. Last but not least, I have it with an increment step. So I'll show this one this time with 3 and 10. So 3 is my starting, 10 is my stopping. And last but not least, I have an increment step of 2. So remember, this will start at 3 since it's inclusive. It will not include 10 since it's exclusive, but it's going to increment by 2 instead of 1 now since my increment step is 2. So if I print out num, you'll notice that I get 3, 5, 7, and 9. Since after I pass the 9, I am no longer inside my set, and my for loop will end. So this is great if you want to deal with the numbers directly. However, sometimes maybe you just want to run something that's inside there 10 times. Well, I know that if I use a range with 10, this loop ran 10 times. Since I have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that's 10 numbers. So this will run 10 times. If I want to deal with the numbers, I might use something like this. But if I want to run it a specific amount of times, I will generally be using this sort of layout. Okay, last but not least, I'm going to show what happens if you want to deal with negative numbers instead of positive numbers. Now, if I try to use for num in range and put 0 and put negative 10, if I attempt to run this, I'll end up with a syntax error and it'll give me a problem because I gave negative 10. So what I'm going to do is change this to 10, like I did normally, so it's just going to count from 0 to 10. And then what I'm going to do is instead of printing out my number normally, I'm going to print my number multiplied by negative 1. So what this will do is it will count from 0 to negative 9 now in my output, since I decided to change the numbers to negatives. So instead of changing the numbers inside the range, I'm going to change the numbers inside my actual loop. So if I run this, notice I get 0, negative 1, negative 2, all the way until negative 9. Okay? So please do not try to use numbers in here that don't line up properly. You want to make sure that you are using positive numbers and that you are making the smaller one the first number and the larger number the second number. Multiplying negative numbers will give us negative instead of positive. This makes your life a lot easier. Last but not least, what I'm going to show is what happens if we're not sure what number we're going to get. So I'm going to deal with here a number that I've been given by the user, and I want to run my loop that many times. So what I'm going to do in my range is I'm going to say for num in range, and I'm going to say 0, num2, or alternatively, I also could have just put in num2. I'll show you why I put 0 in a second. And what this will do is this will run it the exact amount of times that they inputted it. Now, if I wanted to start from 0 and go until the number that they gave me, well, that won't work with this since it won't include the number they gave me. So in order to do that, sorry, let me just show it with you without it first. So if I type in, for instance, 65 or 54, sorry, I'm going to enter, and I get 0 all the way until 53. If I want to include that number though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 1 to it. And the reason for this is that in order to include that number, I need to go 1 further than it, since I know my last number is exclusive. Okay, if I do this now, and I run it, I'll use a smaller number this time, such as 7, and I get 0 to 7, including the 7. Okay, so that's an introduction to using ranges with loops. Please remember, there are 3 ways to do them. You can do a stop, a start and stop, and a start, stop, and step. When using these in a for loop, they will just go through the numbers inside the ranges one by one. If you want to print them, you can print them. If you want to do something else with them, you can. Remember, whatever goes in the body of your code or your loops is up to you. It doesn't really matter.